Hey guys, welcome to the Spiritual Warrior Podcast. I'm your host, Bob Cirino, and this is a podcast where we investigate through the lens of many different perspectives what it means to live fearlessly on purpose. So we try to pull out why are people motivated to do what they do, and what are the practices and techniques and wisdom that make them fearless in their pursuit of their purposes. So we have a really awesome guest with us today. We connected a long time ago. I've been trying to get him on this podcast for a while, so I'm so happy to have Dav Jones with us today. I see him as a spiritual warrior. Dav has taught over 10,000 hours of yoga workshops and classes. And, Dav, I was thinking about that. They say the 10,000 rule of mastery. And so if you taught for 10,000 hours, that doesn't even talk about how much you've practiced. And so we're very lucky to have Dav with us today. He's tuning in all the way from Wales, United Kingdom. So Dav, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm really excited and intrigued about the conversation we're going to have. Very inspired by Bob and his knowledge and the way in which he translates the practice of yoga. So certainly very kind of excited in lots of ways to see where this conversation goes.
Yeah, likewise. Well, thanks so much for joining. So Dav, being a spiritual warrior means that we have something that's calling us forward. We have some kind of big purpose, and that we pursue that purpose fearlessly. So I want to unpack that by first starting with, in your opinion, in your perspective, what is your purpose?
So that's quite a huge existential question, which I've certainly been navigating since I got into the uh, practice, you could say, of yoga. And there's always been quite an underlying intrigue of my life, in all honesty. There's always been kind of that interest there in regards to discerning what my purpose is. Come across yoga in 2013, and it seemed then, as soon as I kind of stepped into that self practice or that inquiry of the self with the concepts and practices of yoga, that this question, what is my purpose, started to become a little bit more clearer. I think in yoga we often call this
Cool.
purpose Dharma, right? What is your Dharma? Um,
Mm.
and I found what I know, or how in which I could explain that so far, is certainly like my Dharma is to be in service of others,
Mm.
and how in which I can find certain types of, you could say, templates, systems, which have been suitable and very, very helpful in the ways in which I can navigate my own suffering in life, and how in which I could like potentially translate that to others. Um, and that's been really kind of quite a healing for me, because in the process
Mm.
of learning, or at least being able to translate my own experience to others, and how in which I could potentially offer that guidance to others, especially being a yoga teacher, and inquiring into the spiritual practice, there are many different routes to take, and I think
Sure.
I always really draw into the acknowledgement and the knowing that like everyone has their own certain path, and
Mm.
we cannot control what other people feel or think,
Right.
and I think that's important to remember. So although we might have our own way of doing things, or our own route to take in order for us to suffer less, it's important, well, it's been important for me to kind of recognize, okay, unless the individual's wanting to listen or they're asking you to share, then who are we to approach in an
Mm.
unsolicited way? So I often kind of teach from that prospect, or that concept, really. And that's always been kind of quite a kind of fundamental aspect, or an area of my sharing, if you will, as a teacher. Um, but I would say, like, at the core of my being, and what seems to be very clear at the moment, is my purpose typically is to want to be able to share how in which we can kind of navigate more of an easeful life in almost kind of like this chaos of of concepts, of ideas, of opinions, of
Yeah.
um, comparison, discrimination, all of these kind of intertwine into how in which we try to find our own way in life in order to find more contentment, really, this kind of idea of santosha. And I think that's really, really important. And how in which that individual is able to kind of find that route and open to sharing, for instance, but at the
Mm.
same time, as they famously say, once the aspirant is ready, the teacher will arrive, type thing. So it's certainly that is an area which kind of gives me continuously kind of like gives me that continuous almost like motivation and
Yeah.
aspiration to kind of like continually drop into that aspect of service, really. Yeah.
So you said that as you began your yoga journey, that this purpose, or this dharma, became clearer and clearer. Can you tell me about how the how your practice helped to clarify that that's what's important to you and that's what you want to do?
Yeah, and I was initially attracted into the yoga practice when I first come across it. I was going through personal issues, and it was more so of from what I knew at the time and from my experience as growing up in the UK, and through my teenage years especially, and kind of you could say like the curriculum in schools where you're almost kind of
Hmm.
encouraged to step into these comparative
Of course,
pa
yeah.
paradigms, and so that's what I knew. Um,
Hmm.
and upon leaving school and coming into adult life, it was those were the systems that I was aligned with, or at least that I knew how in which to
Yeah.
do life. Um, and I noticed they continually were showing up in my life, and there was always something with following that type of structure that didn't seem fulfilling. It wasn't quite,
Mm.
there was always some form of dissatisfaction there. It wasn't it
Interesting.
wasn't so much of a thinking thing. I could kind of feel it, but at the time I didn't really know how to express or explain that. And I found
Sure.
through yoga, when I initially got into the practice of asana, again, I was using those templates, those systems of like, okay, achievement-based mindset protocols,
Yeah,
if
yeah.
you will.
Yeah.
And just through the journey, especially for the first few years of kind of really diving deep into the asana practice, started to recognize that this kind of goal orientated mindset, again, there was this um, acknowledgement of this isn't fulfilling me. And so
Mm.
I started to ask the question to myself of like, okay, so once you achieve one posture, there's always going to be the next,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
right?
and that's not going
And
to
there's always
end.
going to be somebody who does it better than you,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And so I started to realize, or at least my mind, my cognition, for instance, was
Yeah.
kind of wanting, or my ego, however you want to call it, was wanting this finish line,
Yeah, totally.
and then I started to realize, well, what if there isn't a finish line? And then I just kind of
Nice.
start to realize, okay, so if my intention behind practicing asana is to
Yeah.
approach or to go over this finish line, I'm then kind of falling into these previous paradigms or systems that I was used to of
Right.
competitiveness
The
and
the
yeah,
the very way I was trying to get out of it is becoming the exact thing that I wanted to get out of.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Dev, I remember I kind of had a similar experience, and it was, some people it's like a process, and for some people they have like a moment of clarity or something like that, or sometimes it's both. And I remember I was doing a pyramid pose, right? And so I'm jamming on my hamstrings, just and I'm watching the YouTube video, right? And I'm just like, look at how good they are.
Right.
And then look how inflexible I am. And I was like, I need to be like them. And so I remember I just was like pushing, 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 which is the opposite of what you just said of, oh, I want to live an easeful, content life. And here I am, the opposite of ease,
Mm,
totally unsatisfied.
yeah.
And I'm just jamming. And then I just I don't know what I did, but I really injured my hamstring. And I remember that one moment, I was like, I am so stupid because I just did the opposite of what I was trying to do, right? I'm doing yoga to heal my body. I'm doing yoga to feel at home in my body, to feel like I'm inhabiting this like spaceship that I have called body.
Yeah.
And the exact practice that I'm trying to do, I just now accomplished the opposite. And now I can't practice, I'm hurt, and I'm unhappy. But that moment was like this total recontextualization of like, this is not what I want.
Yeah, there's the teaching right there, isn't it?
Totally.
Yeah. It's a really um once it lands and you realize
Yeah.
however in which you recognize the teachings, whether that comes through a potential negative experience or an injury,
Sure. Right.
for instance, or however in which that is experienced through your own consciousness, your own lens, it's how in which you look at that, isn't it? Through your
Mm-hmm.
own kind of like your soma, your psychology, and how in which we can relate to those kind of experiences and then kind of grow from them,
Yeah.
essentially speaking. Um, but like, yeah, digressing here and then going back to what I was mentioning there. So the asana practice, then it started to translate and evolve, if you will, for me into a place of like, okay, so what's really important for you in order to continue this practice? Because I found I come to this plateau in my asana practice
Mm.
where I could achieve, let's say, most advanced postures, you know,
Sure.
and but it wasn't fulfilling, there was like this
Mm.
emptiness within me. I felt kind of like sullen with it all, really, and I started to have to reframe my reasons for practicing, or my reframe the reasons for this physical practice. And I come up with the idea there then that kind of came through was like, it's important that you have an intention behind what you're doing, what you're practicing, where are you
Mm.
going, and so this previous intention, I'm going to be, I'm doing asana in order to achieve these poses, but it's going to be like an
Yeah.
unfulfilling prophecy, if you will. Um, and so it was really important for me then as I move forward from this kind of plateau and for my practice to further evolve was to really distinguish like a wholesome intent, and
Mm-hmm.
this then started to really um, ask my being also into like, what are the bigger reasons behind you doing what you're doing? What is your purpose? What is your Dharma for
Mm.
being here? That's
Yeah.
more so kind of like ingrained within, your inner kind of passion here. What is that? And so I started to ask that question and then, changing my kind of approach to asana a lot where started to introduce more of, you could kind of say, in so many ways, your intention is similar to like a prayer, or whatever have you.
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so you
Sure.
step into that intention. And then it allowed me to kind of like really align with this desireless action. I wasn't
Mm.
I wasn't doing practice in order to be able
Mm.
to do, or, I was trying to release the action of doing and more so looking to step into that witnessing of the being or the moment of the being. And that was like one of the most profound teachings for me, really, that's helped me to kind of now step into more so of this experience of contentment and fulfillment, you know.
Mm.
And then
Mm.
it's kind of allowed me to
Yeah.
kind of draw away from more so of the judgmental stuff, the competitiveness, the achievement based stuff. That has its time and place, especially the achievement stuff, for sure. But at the same time, if that's all you're thinking of, you're
Yeah.
it's as if you're continuously seeking something that's outside of yourself.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, that's kind of like, well, I want to say in a nutshell, it's a bit more of a nutshell, you know.
No. So this podcast is about being a warrior, of the spiritual type, and I find that there's a really interesting seeming paradox between this idea of a warrior who, you know, is very engaged, very active, very like has a goal, like is going to accomplish something, and at the same time being content and desireless. So how do you hold these two, in your mind and your heart at the same time of saying, I don't, I'm not attached to this posture. However, I am committed to achieving a state of contentment. Like, how do we strive without striving? Or, how do you hold these two in balance, Dad?
It's a very, very good question. I think I want to relate more so into like the practice of like aparigraha and vairagya, non-attachment. And
Sure.
the more that we kind of like attach to a certain outcome, I feel that
Mm-hmm.
our psychology tends to then be kind of caught on those like grasping for something that's outside of ourselves. I'm going to be okay if I have this, or I'm going to be okay if I can do front splits. I'm going to be a great yogi if I can do a handstand. I'm going to be a great yogi if I can meditate for an hour without any pain. All these types of kind of like that paradox of like everything will be fine once I've climbed the top of that mountain, type thing.
Yeah.
And I think the more that we can kind of balance our practice between it's a worthwhile approach, in my own experience, at least to have a direction that you're heading in. What
Mm-hmm.
types of values do you align with? Keep those values kind of like ingrained within the reasons for your direction. But then finding this kind of harmony in your practice where you're able to drop into these senses of being and just being the witness to, what you are experiencing, whether that's in your asana practice, in your day-to-day life, and witnessing what comes up if you are kind of like attached to the idea that something needs to be in a certain way. If it's not in that
Yeah.
certain way, you recognize is where the triggers come in, or where your frustrations might come in, or your annoyances start to arise. And those are the teachings for me that has been quite prevalent, and at least such a fantastic teacher. Why is it
Yeah.
that I need it to be in a certain way for me to feel this sense of contentment, right? Um, and I think the more that you're able to drop into this sense of being, it cultivates contentment.
Hmm.
And once you're able to cultivate that sense of being through certain practices, whether that's your asana practice, whether that's pranayama, whether that's meditation, mindfulness, whatever in which you use in order to be able to kind of witness the experience that you're living, the moment to moment experience that you're living. I think I've found, at least so far, it kind of drops that discriminative mind and just allows you to kind of be in more awe, that sense of it, like
Hmm.
witnessing, like almost like that childlike nature where you can just see things as they
Yeah.
are rather than
Hmm.
them needing to be something different to what they is, to what it is.
You're reminding me of one of my favorite teachings ever that just floored me. Was by an Indian sage named Shantideva, around 700 AD, wrote a text called the Bodhisattvacharya Avatara, the Bodhisattva's Guide, the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. And and he said, warriors think that they're great because they kill a man, but the nature of a man is that he will die. And so, in all reality, the warriors accomplish no great thing. It's just accelerated in inevitability. So, but a spiritual warrior takes on a different foe, and that foe is of a mental quality. And so, when we're talking about how do we show up, like we will attack somebody who maybe steals our money or steals our whatever, steals like these worldly things. But then when there's a mental foe that steals our happiness, we don't know what to do. And so like I want to be content. Who doesn't want to be content? Like this idea of living in an easeful, graceful way in a state of awe and childlike joy. Like, come on, that's amazing.
Oh,
And so then what are the enemies? What are the foes that are coming and stealing that from me? because the nature of those is that they're self-perpetuating, right? The more anger we experience and we respond to with anger, the more anger we'll have, right? The more scarce that we feel, I don't have time, I don't have space, I don't have energy. And then the more we respond negatively to that, then the more of that we get. And so, when you're, what I like that this differentiation of, I'm not striving for a posture. I'm striving for contentment in whatever posture I'm in. And the thing that I'm striving against, and I use that word with big air quotes, against is the thing which steals my contentment, which is my pride, my jealousy, my ego, my, desire. And that's where the aparigraha, or
Yeah,
the
yeah,
vairagya comes in. Like, I love the word vairagya. I'm a nerd about Sanskrit. You probably know that because you've heard my other podcast.
yeah, yeah.
but like, but like rag is like, you can think of rag comes into English as like rage, and so
Wow.
it means
Okay.
like passion, and so it's like, and then vai means to split. So you find it in like divide, or in bicycle or bifocals, like it comes into bifurcation. So what we're doing is we're splitting ourselves from passionate attachment to something. And so if we can, and it's not that we don't have that, and I think that's such an important nuance. It's like, I can recognize that I want that headstand, or I can recognize that I want that Porsche, or
Yeah.
whatever it is, that thing that's like attractive to you. You can still recognize and honor that that's a real experience. But as you said, you are the witness of that. You are not that,
Yes, exactly.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's huge. That's revelatory. So Dav, I want to take this into a little bit of a different category, because I know that you're working on something really big right now. You've been super busy for the last 6 months. And so I want to hear about what you've been working on. And then I want to hear about how these ideas translate from your posture practice to your project practice.
I hear you. Having kind of like, explored the asana practice for the last 11 years or so, and then now taking my kind of yoga practice more so into the subtle practices, having a regular meditation practice, more kind of static, um, mindful type practices. It's really allowed me to kind of like reframe, if you will, the traps that you could potentially get into for the asana practice due to kind of societal um, opinions of what we've kind of learned, especially in the West, that we've kind of grown up with. Um, and I still continue to teach asana in workshops, and a lot of
Yeah.
the online practices and pre-recorded classes and courses that I share. You're working towards certain postures, you're working towards certain peak poses, for instance. Um, but again, like you say, how in which I can add in that kind of additional essence to my teaching is
Mm.
to remember, like, we are not there. Witness your psychology, witness the causal narrative that's going on through you. And I think something that's always quite aligned really well with finding, you know, where it is on your psychology, the reasons for doing something, is to find
Mm.
that middle path. If you're continually seeking something and before you know, you get caught in this psychology of where it's like, that's all you're thinking,
Mm-hmm.
it can kind of then become quite toxic and unhealthy to the point in which you miss the sense of being. And the middle
Mm.
path, I always kind of like that Buddhist concept of finding the middle way.
Yeah.
That's really something that always resonates well with me. And so I think it's important, and it's something which I also relate to in my teaching, is to not get attached to that outcome of like, it doesn't make you any better as a yoga practitioner once you're able to attain a certain posture. It's the exploration in that process, which is the magic, you know.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's something that I've went through myself to can have that kind of experiential sharing with my with my students and the people that practice with me. Um, and I think it's worthwhile just to recognize the narratives that go on in the mind. Because once you start to get to certain, I don't want to say like levels or whatever have you, but you become very familiar in your physical body with asana, then the
Mhm.
mind has another opportunity to just to go wild.
Yeah.
Because you're so,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you're so used to downward facing dog, or you're so used to,
Right.
the vinyasa practice or the hatha practice, or however in which you want to translate the asana practice. The body's used to it. So the mind then gets to, the hamster wheel starts to go again. And so it's kind of
Hmm.
drawing that awareness back to being present with what you're doing. Um, and so, yeah, it's like a culminative um, exploration of kind of like witnessing the causal, the energetic, as well as the physical as you're practicing asana, um, and allowing that to kind of translate through in your experience. And just watching those attachments, the vairagya, and making sure that whenever you do have those subtle moments, just witnessing like what, you know, I always have kind of these reflective moments where you're saying, well, which direction am I heading? And sometimes that requires a redirection or a different kind of
Totally.
path,
Yeah.
and that does, I have noticed over, you know, you do come to those phases and those plateaus where it's kind of like, actually, I need to have a little rethink here where my direction is
Yeah.
going. And so, yeah, I wouldn't, there's a time and a place for achievement based kind of mindset. But what I'm kind of saying here in a nutshell is just to make sure you don't get just caught in that story, because it doesn't essentially lead to this sense of fulfillment, or at least what I'm experiencing from my own practice. And contentment is, you know, in the spiritual practice, we live in this dualistic mindset, or we speak in dualism essentially. Our language is dualistic, so there's always opposing,
Hmm.
and it's recognizing that like there's always going to be ups and downs. That's the reality in which we live in.
Yeah.
Um, so in order to find that contentment, can we be the witness to the challenging times, and can we fully
Hmm.
embrace those like positive times and really drop into those sense of like, how can we use these potentially negative experiences or these challenging times in the life where we can learn from these moments? And then how in which, when we are experiencing these senses of like joy, happiness, remembering at
Hmm.
these moments, whether they're negative or positive or how in which you want to describe them, it's transient. The only fact that we know is everything is change, you know? And so, yeah, that's kind of like how and which I try to translate this narrative across into my teaching. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that's it,
You
mate.
know, I think for a lot of people who listen to this podcast, um, you know, we're here because we're trying to do something awesome. You know, that's why people are going to be listening to this. And and sometimes, I've caught myself in this thought where, like you said, I had to sit down and be like, what is the story I'm telling? Because that's so critical. Um, and I'm like, I have to, like, my purpose is to serve. Just like you're saying, my purpose is to serve. But then when I look at my process of fulfilling that purpose, it is not serving.
Mm,
So
mm,
like it's like, oh man, I'm gonna do 20 hours of just like focus, like get it today, which isn't wrong inherently, but I wasn't in that middle way. I was in an extreme
mm,
of
mm.
like, I gotta go, I gotta go, I gotta go. And my wife's like, hey, I exist.
Yeah, sure.
My body's like,
Wow.
you haven't drank water, right?
Yeah.
And my meditation cushion is like, I miss you. And so it's like, but I got, but the story is, I gotta serve, I gotta serve, I gotta serve. And the story isn't wrong,
Mm,
but is it an accurate observation of my reality? Right.
mm,
And so like because it's like, I love this analogy. Like one of the like really classical ways that people express this idea of illusion or Maya in the world is that we think a thing is a way that is not that way. And then we live our whole
Yeah.
life thinking that that thing is that way, only to get to the end and maybe at the end realize that it just simply was not that way. And so they use the example of like a snake charmer or like a magician. Sorry, more than a snake charmer, who convinces everybody that a stick is a snake. So the magician
Yeah.
knows it's not a snake, but through sleight of hand or what have you, everyone buys into this illusion that it's a snake, and then you have all these very real experiences, fear, like nervousness or whatever, based on an illusion. So is the illusion fake? No. The illusion is absolutely real because you're experiencing it as real, but is it ultimately real? No, because it's a stick, not a snake. And so, I'm serving. Is it a stick or is it a snake?
Yeah.
Right? Am I caught in the illusion and then identifying with the illusion and basing my whole life around that? And even if I had good intentions, right? I want to serve. It's a good intention, but am I serving? And the
Yeah.
answer is no.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I have similar experiences to that, and finding the balance, if you will, between. I kind of try to. I'm also relate this to like your own independence and how in which you can be interdependent.
Okay, tell me more.
So, for instance, like maybe a lot of yoga teachers that can relate to this, or when you first start to get into yoga teaching, prior to getting your qualification as a yoga teacher, you do your regular self practice and you're very committed to that. You persevere with your self practice. As soon as you get your yoga teaching certificate, next thing you know, you're teaching as much as you can. And
Mm.
pretty much most of your schedule throughout that week is teaching classes. And I'll quite often ask teachers that have just qualified, let's say, oh, how's your self
Yeah.
practice going? Oh, I don't have
Right,
time for
right,
that.
right.
I don't have time for that. I'm teaching at the moment, right? And so
Yeah.
it gets to the point now after so long where you've kind of neglected your own independence, your self-care, your own
Yeah.
self-practice. And so certainly noticing that kind of phase that you're going to go through as you are in service, it is finding the balance with between remembering the self. I laughed before when you mentioned like your meditation cushion saying, "Hey, I miss you." So we
Yeah.
we still got to show up for ourselves, but how and which can we still honor that part of our own practice in order so that we can
Yeah.
be kind of present and fully able to share and be in service from a more of a grounded kind of like wholesome place. Because eventually, like I say, if we kind of like get into that pattern of overly sharing, we can
Mm.
almost sometimes get into the traps there more so of people pleasing as well, which is also something like you say,
For sure.
we're kind of like there seems to be whatever kind of routes that we take, there's a spectrum, isn't there? We can either be doing
Hmm.
too much or not enough. And so this is where I mentioned before about this Buddhist middle path, how in which, and the
Yeah.
same in respects to being of service or being in service, and that's what your Dharma might
Yeah.
be. And if you feel aligned with that, great, but don't forget your own self-practice in the process, you know.
Hmm.
Mm.
So this is very easy to talk about, hard to catch.
Mm.
Right? Because when you're in it, you're in it.
Yeah.
And that's why you're in it, because you've lost perspective. So in your life personally, Dev, what are some of the ways that you have been able to catch yourself, hopefully earlier and earlier, to say, am I in the middle or am I flying off to one of the extremes? Like, what's a tip or a trick that you can share with our listeners from your own life
Mm.
about having that awareness?
It's a fantastic question, and it's like this, my sharing of this is going to be my own experience, and this might
Right.
relate
Yeah.
differently to other people, and you might have different patterns that show up in your own process. You might find, okay, I need to draw things back a bit here, or I could potentially give more. A really interesting thing that's been happening to me of late, and I would say maybe the last kind of 18 months, I find sometimes if I share too much, then I get headaches.
Interesting.
And so kind of learning a lot
Hmm.
more about my own emotional somatic feelings that come up in my body, it's becoming more aware of my kind of nervous system regulation. So I find that
Hmm.
these headaches, I would say, that I'm recognizing are also linked to my overwhelm, anxiety, apprehension. And
Hmm.
I'm finding that if I find that right balance, so again, it's like checking in with what can I manage? And if I am in these states of overwhelm where I'm experiencing these headaches, then I have to be very present with myself and ask myself the honest question, how am I,
Yeah.
how am I feeling? And I'll
Right.
often do this and draw my awareness inwards. And so I'll be honest with how I'm feeling. And then the second question that I ask is, what do I need? And I respond to those two questions. And I pretty much, as soon as I can, at least try to action and be kind of honorable to my own requests there for myself. And so that might require, in order for me to find that kind of harmonization with my nervous system there, is sometimes just to spend time by myself. So if I've been, let's say, if I've been over giving, um,
Hmm.
then it's important for me, in order for me to kind of respect my own kind of self-care, then is to take those necessary actions in order to
Hmm.
find that regulation again. And that's been a practice and a continuous kind of action of refining. I
Yeah.
typically don't, like years ago, I used to teach maybe in excess sometimes of 4 to 5 classes per day, but it was continuously in service. So that was quite a lot of
Right.
teaching. And it was almost like I wasn't typically, you could kind of say I was always thinking of where I'm going next or where was my next class.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
like I'm continuously living perpetually in the future.
Totally.
And yeah, I had my
Yeah.
sequences and I was present when I was teaching, but at the same time, it was quite a go, go, go type
Hmm.
pattern that I was recognizing. And that was a phase that you know, had to go through and experience in order to get where I am today. But essentially speaking, now it's more so of a space of like really how and which can I show up in the best possible way if I am going to choose to be in this practice of service. And it's really vitally
Hmm.
important in order for me to find that sense of kind of harmony in my nervous system. Because I find that if I'm overwhelmed, I'm anxious or apprehensive,
Hmm.
then these other frustrations come up. Then I do start to
Yeah.
experience these emotions of anger, frustration, or confusion, or not knowing how, or not being able to make a decision in the moment, right? And then that can
Mm-hmm.
often relate to a lot of the psychologies that I kind of adopted in my conditioning and growing up, where I would be quite harsh on myself, so kind of critical
Sure.
um, belief systems that I had. So it's been quite an exploration in order to kind of like unravel this. What in order do I need to do in to be able to show up in the best possible way if I am going to choose to be in
Yeah.
service? And that required me to kind of learn more about what I was feeling. I think definitely for the first 25 years of my life, at least, I was more of a thinker rather than a feeler,
Yeah.
you know?
I relate.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And the yoga practice certainly has enabled me to kind of drop more so into the feeling sense.
Totally.
The
Yeah.
thinking mind certainly helps me in order to navigate, you could say.
Oh, it's both,
Yeah,
right?
exactly,
Like
exactly.
it's absolutely critical to have both because it's
Mm,
checks and balances. Like,
mm,
so we think about like we have a mental internal experience that's emotional, and then we have a physical external experience. And external includes your gut. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like
yeah.
it doesn't mean like internal isn't on the inside of your skin. Like it's like just this gross physical world that we engage in, or even the subtle physical world. And so there's this beautiful Tibetan phrase called Chinang Tabla Sorbe. And what that means is we use our outer and our inner methods together for yoga.
Mm,
And so,
yeah.
and the way that we teach, one of the ways that I've learned and that I teach is that yoga isn't going from the outside in,
Mm,
of going from the postures. And it's also not going from the inside out, going from meditation into it's doing both
mm,
in union.
mm,
So yoga, there's lots of translations. One of the most common one is union. And so what if we used our external world as as a reflection of our internal world? And what if we use our internal world as a reflection of how we're cultivating our external world? And then we start to get into this like where we get to see the reflection of the two reflecting off of each other. And then you get to make one change on the outside world and see how it changes your inside world. And make a change on the inside world and see how it changes your outside world. And especially as yogis, people who use their bodies, and especially when you get deeper and deeper into, the teachings, there is a direct connection and correlation between the thoughts and emotions that you're having and the way that you're experiencing your physical body. So I love the cue of the headache, and I just want to relate again to doing Mahabandha, which is where we take 3 bandhas, which are like locks or capsules, where we're trying to move inner energy in specific ways and then keep it there. And what I was doing is I was going from bottom up. So I was doing Mula Bandha, then Uddiyana, and then Jalandhara, and I would get headaches. And I was like, it's like this, so like I'm having this response, like I'm having this consequence. And so then I started taking Jalandhara first, and then Mula Bandha, and then Uddiyana.
Nice.
And because what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring that prana into the central channel and bring it up. And what I found was that, just by at something as simple as I have a headache, then I was able to use that as a pivot point to then adjust my practice or adjust my life or adjust my relationship or, whatever you want to say. But I really love finding super simple things that become these like landmarks. Like, how am I doing? Do I have a headache? I don't have to go into this existential crisis, for me, it's dehydration. Am I dehydrated? Because like that is such a fundamental basic part of taking care of this body that I know that when I'm way flying off, like agitated, way too full throttle, that's, you look at your pee.
Yeah, sure.
Right? And it's it's like, oh, okay, cool. Now I have this like canary in the coal mine. Now I need to respond thoughtfully, knowing, this animal of Bob or this psychology of Bob, and then make adjustments.
Yeah. And I think if you continually negate what you're witnessing and choose to ignore that, then it's for your own choice there. So then, of course, that leads to suffering, for instance. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, with the term of spiritual warrior is like, we can get so caught up in winning the war of the worldly things that we totally neglect this absolutely critical aspect of ourselves, which is how you doing? Not what do you have?
Exactly.
How are you? And so, one of the things that I really try to share and that I really try to draw out in podcasts like these is, when we go and we get all those things, but we totally neglect that insight. We get those things, we get the posture, we get the car, we get the whatever, and there's still this void, this lack of fulfillment. And so we need to not neglect that outside world to be with the inside world, because you'll find that you can't have an internal relationship without having a relationship with the external world, because the two are in unity through, you can't have one without the other. But if you only look at the outside, then you can definitely experience the inside wither. And then you're like, what the hell am I fighting for? Like, why am I doing this? But if you can get that internal like compass of, I want to feel content, and not in disregard to the things, but inclusive of the things outside, or I want to have this sense of ease, right? I'm working with a team and it's just not working, right? And so it's not like, screw the team, I want ease. No, we have to see that the team is the conduit for us to cultivate ease in a new way in our life.
Yeah.
And so if we can have this inclusive, encompassing thing, then I think that is the battlefield of the spiritual warrior, is both at the same time.
Yeah, it's really like on-point conversation here. I think that one of the terms that comes up, which especially can sometimes be bypassed in regards to when people get into the spiritual practice or even the yoga practice, is the term spiritual bypassing, and it's like, not everything is just love and light. It's not It's not our reality. And the more that we go into the depths of understanding the self, we realize, okay,
Yeah.
how and which can I, embody not just the moments of joy, happiness, and contentment, but
Can can you imagine a warrior bypassing their foe? Like, nope,
right,
not today. And it's like, you get your
yeah,
head cut off.
well, exactly, yeah, yeah, and that's it. And I think a lot of the challenges, though, when we do go into the practices of yoga, is just, in a lot of the
Yeah.
ways, we don't really know how, or at least in my own experience in the culture in which I grew up in, we don't really know how to relate to these emotions that in society have almost been deemed
Totally.
as unacceptable, right? Or
Yeah.
no, we don't say that, or we don't behave like this, or we do not express this emotion like that.
Right.
And that's been the
Hmm.
challenging thing for me, in order to kind of like find those environments in which I am able to express these somewhat unwelcome emotions in a safe space in
Hmm.
which where the container can be there. Um, and then when that full expression is able to come through without hurting
Hmm.
others or yourself, then this is where the magic can happen. It's where we start to then embody
Yeah.
and transcend essentially. And we find that sense of like feeling complete or feeling fulfilled, feeling
Yeah.
content, And I think that's where a lot of the teachings I'm noticing, especially societally and culturally, um, kind of through modern westernized ideas, and
Hmm.
yeah.
And I find I love that you use the word container
Mm,
for like create a space,
yeah.
create a container.
Mm,
The way that I've always felt about my practice, and something I've just been thinking, I've been wanting to say this whole thing is, I think that rituals are so important, and not ritual in like a weird way, you know what I mean? Not like, but ritual as in like something that you do on a consistent basis for a purpose that's very deep inside of you. And I think that having that consistency, like the way that I first really started thinking about my meditation practice was I called it the laboratory, or I called it, the dojo, or I felt like I'm driving the car all day long, but I'm never looking under the hood,
mm,
and how foolish is that? And so it's like, yeah, I have to take the car off the track in order to open up the hood. And then
mm.
I go into the lab and then I investigate. And I'm like, does this work like that? Oh my gosh, it totally doesn't. And I've been living 30 years thinking that that's how it works.
Yeah,
But I'm
yeah,
so glad that I have a dedicated space where this is my intention. And then what the other thing that I love, other than creating the space for that to be a thing, is that what I found. So my personal physical practice, like with postures, is the same. I've been doing basically the same sequence. There's like two sequences I've been doing for, I don't know, easily 4 or 5 years,
mm,
and you can think that that's boring, but it's so not boring to me, because by doing the same thing, then you're fixing a variable, right? So in this duality of like, there's the world and then there's me. Um, if the world is constantly changing and if I'm constantly changing, it's hard to really have a control and understand the variables. Right? I have a science background, so I think in science terms. So
yeah,
you
yeah.
need a control for a good hypothesis.
Mm,
You need a control, and then you need to have a hypothesis and then a way to compare your results against that control. And
yeah,
so if I'm doing the same sequence every single day, that's the same. And then I'm different. And so I get to see how I've showed up.
mm,
And so I'm like, oh, I hate this freaking Jalandhar, like I hate this thing, right? And it's like, well, Bob, like last week you were feeling really good in that posture, so what's changed? Has the posture changed? Nope. Have I changed? Okay,
mm.
now that is the field. That's my laboratory now to get into understanding what's going on in my life. What are the stories that I'm telling? How am I doing? How am I feeling? Like you're saying,
Mm.
right? And then what do I need?
Yeah,
Because I'm getting feedback and it's very clear, because I've created the space for the feedback and I've created the conditions through a ritual that's consistent to have what I would consider high quality data, where I'm like, you can't ignore it, buddy. Like, if everything's variable, the mind is so tricky at convincing us that we don't have to do hard work. Or like we don't have to like engage with that really uncomfortable trauma that we've been sweeping under the rug for
Yeah,
like
yeah,
18 years or
yeah, yeah.
whatever. And so if we start to like control the condition set, then it's harder and harder and harder to convince ourselves that, oh, it's not that. It's like, no, dude, the truth has presented itself and you are obligated to do something about it. And then we learn the practices of yoga, or whatever your tradition, or whatever your methodology is. We learn those things to then engage skillfully with that and then transform them into contentment, ease, and fulfilling our mission, whatever your mission is.
Uh,
Yeah.
it's really interesting, isn't it? Because you have the concepts or the structure, let's say a Raja Yoga, you've got these 8 limbs, and
Yeah.
it was almost as if like I invested all of this time into the asana practice, which is the third limb. And then we have the yamas and the niyamas, which are kind of like these are
Right.
your ethical and moral restraints, if you will, that you abide by. But it was as if like I really focused on the asana practice to the point in which my reasons for doing asana was this achievement-based mindset type principle. And the more I explored the asana practice, I started to kind of like rewind in so many ways in regards to the Raja Yoga practice, where then I kind of had to eventually take a step back and look at the psychology around contentment, you know, working with the yamas and the niyamas, the first 2 limbs, in order then to
Yeah.
feel this. Because essentially, when you start to master the asana practice, then the mind continually comes back in. Before that, before you kind
Yeah.
of, let's say, master asana, it's the mind's got nothing else to do but to complain or to just
Right.
kind of deal with the struggle and the difficulty in asana in order for there to be some
You know,
form of like progress, if you will.
yeah, but I think that what's nice about that is that you're developing your sea legs of concentration,
Ah,
right? So if you can cultivate that like focus on posture and then focus on mastery, then you can take that same cultivated concentration and then you can transpose it to a different object. So instead of the object being, is my knee over my foot or whatever,
yeah,
like
yeah.
the object can be, was I kind today? And then what you do is, a student of mine, he's like, listen, I can do all these things, I got the posture, I got the this, that. He's like, but I just can't keep my concentration in meditation. And there's a very classic, uh, what I didn't do this exactly because I think this is pretty dangerous, but I still took the idea. What you do is you fill a bowl with boiling water, and you fill it to the very very brim, and you say, "Walk from here to there and don't spill a drop." And so what they're doing is, because they've cultivated this single point of concentration in the relationship of mind to body through their posture practice, then you'd say, now transpose that same concentration,
Ah,
but have the drishti, have that like viewpoint be the water. And then he walked with the water, didn't spill a drop. And I say, okay, now sit
wow, nice.
and bring that same mind to
Mm,
the table.
nice. I
Okay.
love it.
And now ask yourself, is it a stick or is it a snake? Right. That person, like if you're struggling with someone who's harassing you all day, what's the truth of that experience? Is it true that they are actually a bad person? Investigate that. And you can take that same concentration that you cultivated in your hatha practices, in that physical practice, and transpose it into your raja. And we just finished studying the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. And one of the most powerful, like, of this really incredible verse is, there is no hatha yoga, like in the conclusion, right? So we did 4 chapters, like hundreds of verses, and one of the concluding ideas is there is no hatha yoga without raja yoga, and there's no raja yoga without hatha yoga, because it's this idea of it's all integrated, it's all interdependent, and
Nice.
so we need the hatha, which is the practice of uniting the right channel and the left channel and the central channel, or these physical practices, the shakkarmas, the mudras, the bandhas, like all these physical practices. We need that in conjunction with raja yoga, which is having beautiful wisdom and perfect concentration that understands the nature of reality and the nature of the mind. Because if we can bring that Raja mind into the Hatha practice, wow, super powerful,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Super
Absolutely.
powerful. Yeah, transformative. And then, you know, and then you get to start being creative with, okay, ahimsa, that's the first of the yamas, which is the very, very first of all the steps of yoga according to Patanjali, Ashtanga. And so, what is the asana of ahimsa?
Mm.
That's a fun conversation because we think of postures traditionally. The first asanas were sit on your butt for meditation, right? Asana, comes to sit on your ass.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's like asana, right?
Yeah.
But then then we start getting more complicated, like Virabhadrasana, and you have all these blah blah blah. But what about how I'm positioning my body in relationship to you? How about that posture? How about the posture of walking all day with your heart open? Can we talk about that as a posture? What about the posture of prostration? Saying, I surrender to the highest version of myself because I know that that's my destiny. I know that that's my highest potential. So I'm prostrating. I'm rejecting. I'm not prostrating to the self that is egoistic and narcissistic and selfish. I am prostrating
Yeah.
to the most beautiful version of Dav, to the most beautiful version of Bob that is generous and abundant and at ease and content. That's a beautiful asana.
Mm.
So then you start to see through just playing with this idea of the combination of Raja and Hatha, you start to see that Yogi Swatmarama, the author of the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, was totally right. um, you the two are one and the same.
For sure, man.
And you
Yeah.
find in the and you find in the Gita also, another one of the classics where
Mm.
Arjuna, the greatest warrior of his whole time, in the middle of a 4 million soldier army battle, he's having this. He's like, my family's on the other side. I can't kill my family. My guru, my teacher, is on the other side. I can't kill my teacher. But if I don't fight, then my side's going to die because I'm a great warrior. And so what do? Do I take action or do I not take action? Lord Krishna, my chariot driver, you know, what should I do? And Lord Krishna is like, stop being so attached to your action, thinking that by doing something or not doing something is going to be the thing, because that's living in only Hatha Yoga. Lord Krishna is like, where's your heart? Where's your mind? Can we talk about that posture? Because that's the Raja Yoga. What is the story that you're telling yourself about this battle? What is the story that you're telling yourself about fighting or not fighting? Let's get that clear. Let's get rid of all the illusion first, and then when we go to take action, that's how we know that the action will actually bring us the result that we want. Because if we're just stuck in the world of illusion, and you'll know by getting the posture and being unhappy, by getting that car and still being unhappy,
Yeah.
like, action is not the cause of happiness. It's action combined with wisdom that understands the nature of the self that's doing the action and the nature of action itself combined together. That's how we create the results that we want in our life. That's how the posture brings us happiness.
For sure, man. Amen. Yeah,
Anyway,
exactly.
study the classics of yoga. They're great, man.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
um,
Yeah, beautiful.
well, Well, Dav, this was a blast. I really appreciate you taking the time to hang out, and uh, I I bow to you and your journey of your fearless pursuit of serving others. I think that's awesome, and I'm glad that we could intersect a couple times. So thanks so much for being a guest on the show today. If people liked what you had to say, where can they find you and how can they connect?
Yeah, first and foremost, thank you very much for having me on the show. I really enjoyed this topical conversation. I really actually really enjoy these types of an opportunity to, share where our experiences are and how in which we direct our path, for instance, So thank you, Bob. Um, yeah, Dav Jones Yoga is my online Instagram handle. And pretty much that's translated across most platforms. So you can find me on my website is davjonesyoga.com. I pretty much um, feature mainly through my website and my Instagram page. That's how on which you can usually find me. I do have a YouTube channel and also a Patreon channel, which again, you just type in Dav Jones Yoga and you'll find me. Apart from that, yeah, again, Bob, thank you very, very much for having me on the show. Yeah, and I hope those that are listening, you got a lot from it. And yeah, fantastic.
Awesome. And guys, Dav has so many tutorials. We just spent a lot of time about not being achievement based.
Yeah.
However, the practice is great because it is a mirror to observe your mind and to observe the movement of your heart. And so by putting ourselves under the intense conditions, the tapaha of doing a difficult practice like our postures, we can have an even more high energy, high intensity, high clarity perspective on the movement of our heart and mind. So if you'd like to challenge yourself, Dav has so many really, really phenomenal tutorials on how to do great postures. And I love the way that he does it. He goes really accessible. Anybody can start at the first slide on his carousels, and then you'll find yourself falling off on the third or fourth or fifth. But he'll tell you exactly how to progress in a way that's really accessible. So I encourage you to support him on Patreon. You'll find all the links in the show notes below. And thanks so much, Dav. I
Thank you, Bob.
hope that all of our listeners live fearlessly on purpose. Until next time,
Amazing.
peace.